Hello, and welcome to the Writing Successful 2023 TESOL proposals for the International Teaching Assistants Interest section. My name is Stacy Sudals, and I am the ITA-IS past chair for this year. Last year I was the chair, and I have also had some experience with being a TESOL proposal reviewer for the listening, speaking, and pronunciation strand for several years now, as well as being a TESOL Awards reviewer. I have divided this presentation into three sections, and the first section is really just to give you some general information about proposals in general, what the review process looks like, and then I'll get into the nuts and bolts of the proposal itself, followed by actually getting into writing your proposal. Feel free to jump to a different section if you need to, and I will put the time slot for each section in the information at the bottom of this so that you can jump to something if you wanted to go through that on your own. So let's first dive into talking about just some general information about proposals and the review process for TESOL. For TESOL 2022, it was a hybrid convention, and so TESOL offered over 600 in-person sessions and then also offered 200 on-demand or virtual sessions. Something to note, though, is that with all the proposals that are received through TESOL, only about 20 to 25% are accepted. And unfortunately, just the realities of time and space don't always allow for acceptance of every outstanding proposal. And that's something to keep in mind, even if you feel that you wrote a really great proposal and still got rejected. One webpage that I'd like for you to hop over onto is the TESOL 2023 Call for Proposals page. On this page, it has several writing materials and information that are available, and I have tried my best to put a lot of those materials together into this presentation, but I think it will be worthwhile for you to maybe go onto that website and download those materials on your own as you begin working on your proposals. I'd like to draw your attention to some very important dates here. The first deadline that you need to make note of is Wednesday, June 1st at 5 p.m. That is the submission deadline for all proposals through TESOL. Any proposals received after that deadline will not be accepted for the 2023 TESOL conference. Around August 31st is when those who submitted proposals will find out if they were accepted or declined, or if any alternative decisions are made, maybe such as being put on a wait list and waiting to see if other people accept for other proposals. Around October to November is when alternates will be notified, and a date and time will be notified to all presenters who have accepted presentations. Around this time also is when you can make final edits to your abstract and or title, and if you needed to add a presenter name to it, that's around that deadline as well. After that period of time, it's kind of locked into the program and you will not be able to make any edits or changes. When deciding what kind of session you are going to write your proposal for, you need to keep in mind of the 4 different focuses that TESOL has. And you need to be careful about which one you choose, because that can play a role in acceptance or denial of your proposal. And so you'll need to decide whether or not your proposal is a practice or pedagogy-oriented session, a research-oriented session, a conceptually oriented session, or a policy-oriented session. So if your session is based on classroom experience, or it's meant to be applied directly to the classroom or work environment, that would be a practice or pedagogy-oriented session. And in that, usually participants will learn concrete ways to do something, such as teaching, reading, administering, writing, creating, etc. For this kind of session. Now, for a research-oriented session, this is where maybe you have reports on you or your team's original research. It could be pedagogy or policy-focused research, and it may be classroom or action-based. And perhaps there are implications for pedagogy, but the primary goal is to provide information rather than concrete applications. If you're interested in writing a conceptually oriented session, this is where you are providing new perspectives by interpreting or reinterpreting existing theory, practice, or research. And this I haven't necessarily seen a lot of presentations with conceptually oriented sessions, but I think they are always welcomed. And the last one for policy-oriented session, this is where maybe the session will address policy issues or mandates. It may analyze, propose, debate, or otherwise focus on policies or mandates that affect language teaching and learning. After you've decided your session focus, you'll then need to decide on what type of session you are writing your proposal for. I'm not going to go into detail about each one here, but there is a section from the call for proposals where there is a document that is under session types or session types virtual within the additional resources section of that page that goes into more detail about each one of these. I would say the most common ones, at least for in-person sessions, are usually presentations that are 30 to 45 minutes long. Teaching tips are also common ones. And I know people within our interest section have also done poster sessions. Not to say that the other ones don't work, but I'm just pointing out that those are ones that are more common that we use. For virtual sessions, this year and for next year, I think they have all pre-recorded sessions, and so you can take a look at the description in that document on the call for proposals page for more information. Something to take note of is the number of presenters that are allowed for each session type. And for dialogues, poster sessions, or teaching tips, only 2 presenters are allowed for that. For any type of presentation, that would be about 4 maximum people. And any panel discussions or workshops can be up to 6 presenters. I'd like to move on to just discussing a bit about the different strands that TESOL has. These strands are basically areas of focus that proposals are kind of funneled into. And TESOL has about 13 different strands. And depending on what kind of proposal you have, could potentially get a rejection if you're putting it in the wrong strand, which is why this is very important to make sure that you're choosing the strand very wisely with whatever topic it is that you have. I would just propose that you take a look at the strand descriptions page. It goes into lots of detail and gives you lots of different information and examples of what is included in each strand. But just as a reminder, proposals in all strands should address areas relevant to the content area and also to TESOL, which can include issues, theories, practices, processes, or curriculum development. And that doesn't mean all of those have to be in one proposal, but those are things that are usually explored. As I mentioned previously, there are about 13 strands total that you can submit your proposal to for TESOL. And again, these are focus areas that your proposal most aligns with. And so while we are an intersection of international teaching assistants, your proposal will fit into one of these categories when you're submitting for your proposal. You'll notice that there are some numbers next to some of these strands, and that's indicating the number of sessions that were related to international teaching assistance at TESOL 2022. The most common strands that were accepted for our interest section was listening, speaking, and pronunciation, as well as program administration and evaluation. But you can probably see that for most of them, I think our interest section proposals could really fit into most or all of them in some way or another. And so that's something to keep in mind as you are being mindful of which strand you think your proposal will fit best under. And again, as a reminder, you need to make sure you know which strand you're applying to and that it fits very well with that strand. A proposal could be declined if it is perceived to be in the wrong strand. So let's go ahead and talk through about some of the requirements for proposals. So the first thing is that proposals must be submitted through the abstract management system by 5 p.m. on June 1st, and they cannot be edited after the submission deadline, but if they are accepted, there will be a period of time when you can edit the abstract and title along with the presenters, but that will only be after notification of your proposal being accepted. Now, to allow for a blind review, the proposal title, abstract, and description cannot include any information that identifies the presenters, which might include their name or even their affiliated institution. So do take note that that will be automatic disqualification if that information is in there. And for proposals with multiple presenters, all presenters must agree to participate prior to the submission of the proposal so that there isn't any issue with finding presenters later on if you wrote a proposal. Proposals that promote commercial interests will also will be disqualified, and so make sure that you're not promoting any type of book or certain kind of program or something like that within your proposal, just to make sure that there are no issues with that. And finally, a presenter may submit multiple proposals, but each proposal must be submitted individually and it needs to represent a separate presentation. In other words, you cannot submit to multiple strands with the same proposal, or else both proposals that you submit to will be denied. There are some grounds for disqualification, and some of this is repetitive from the previous slide, but making sure that you submit your proposal before June 1st will ensure that it will not be disqualified, but any time after that it will. If your proposal is incomplete or it doesn't follow the instructions in the call for proposals, that can also cause disqualification. As mentioned previously, any identifying information such as the presenters, their names, or the institution in the title, abstract, or description will be an automatic disqualification. And as I also previously talked about, any commercial interests or submitting to multiple strands will be a ground for disqualification. Finally, an additional disqualification factor is if your proposal was plagiarized. Let's move on to the proposal review process. So after you've submitted your proposal, the proposals will be assigned to reviewers in the selected strand that you submitted your proposal to. For example, if you submitted to the listening, speaking, and pronunciation strand, the proposal will be assigned to reviewers specifically in that strand. And those reviewers are current TESOL members with expertise in that specific content area and audience for the proposal. So the review process is blind. The reviewers do not have access to the submitters' names or even their institutions. Each proposal is read and scored according to the rubric by the reviewers with expertise in that specific strand. And there is also strand-specific trainings as well as TESOL general trainings for review. The strand coordinators and assistant strand coordinators, along with the conference's professional counsel, will then review the highly rated proposals and then decide which proposals will get accepted. And so this is just something to make note again, that it is possible that maybe a lot of proposals were submitted with the same topic and they were all highly rated, but maybe only one or two will get accepted just because of trying to balance the program. So some factors affecting the selection of proposals is, of course, the quality of the proposal, as was reflected in the blind rating scores from the trained reviewers using the rubric. Also, any range of topics within the ELT profession, if they're trying to find different topics that will kind of diversify the program. That might be something that they're looking at. Relevance of a topic to the convention attendees. This is also something I'm going to make note of later whenever you're writing your proposal, but you need to keep your attendees in mind, and also keep in mind that even if you're submitting a proposal that's specifically related to international teaching assistance, you still have to make broad conclusions about how other instructors could take away from what it is that you're explaining. Another factor is just the number of presentations on the same or similar topic, doing some kind of balanced strand coverage, and even the presenter's level of expertise as evidenced in the proposal. Something to also make note is professional and geographic distribution of the presenters will be assessed. In other words, taken into account, and trying to have diverse voices in the field, where if there's a certain geographic region of presenters that are always presenting, the proposal selection might choose other presenters. I have been told in the past that if it is your first proposal that you submit or would like to present, sometimes preference is given to someone like that rather than someone who has written proposals before in the past. So let's now move on to the nuts and bolts of the proposal, talking about what's included and also how you're being scored. So I would like to just point you to the proposal worksheet that is in the General Call for Proposals website for TESOL 2023. That worksheet is really helpful with just you getting kind of started, but I'll also walk you along a little bit later on how to kind of work through writing your proposal. But the proposal in itself, there's always a title, which has a maximum of 10 words. The abstract, which is a 50-word maximum, that will be what is included in the program booklet, whether it's virtual or printed. I think last year it was all virtual. And so that's what attendees will see, the title and abstract. But then the session description goes into more detail about what your session will be about. And this is scored by the reviewers, which is sort of an art when it comes to writing. So I'll talk about that later. And that has a 300-word maximum. And then optional is a works cited section, which while I think it says it's optional, I think that it is almost a requirement just to show that you are aware of the different literature and practices and theories within the profession. Before I talk about how you're scored, I would like you to become familiar with the scoring rubric. I made a QR code for you, and you can just either scan that or go onto the tiny URL website that I made for it. This will really give you the best information on what this rubric is about, and I would suggest even printing it out, and once you've written your proposal, try to score yourself and see how well you do with it. And I'll talk more about that later. So here is an overview of how you're being scored, and I'm going to go into each of these in a lot more detail in the next few slides. But the first one is really just the currency, importance, and appropriateness of the topic to the field and audience. The second one is pedagogy, research, theory, and/or policy rationale basis. The third one is your description of the session content and the plan that you have during your session. The fourth one is outcomes and implications for educational settings. The fifth one is the appropriateness of the length, content, and delivery methods that you've put into your proposal. And the sixth one is the overall clarity of the proposal as an indicator of presentation quality. So let's go into each one specifically and kind of break down what that really means. So for this first focus, you need to decide if your proposal specifically highlights the currency, importance, and appropriateness of your session. So in other words, you need to be able to answer the question, so what, about your session. In other words, what makes your session different and worthwhile? Why is it important? And why would convention attendees choose to attend your session? Also, how is it related to the field and/or appropriate for a wide range of TESOL attendees, including pre and in-service, current teachers, teacher educators, teacher scholars, and program administrators. This is a big one that I think people tend to miss, is that whenever they're submitting something that's more specific for ITAs or the ITA interest section, they kind of narrow themselves a little too much, but you do need to find ways to pull out information from your session that could be applicable to a wider range of an audience in your proposal. The second focus is based on previous pedagogy, research, theory, or policy rationale. And this is quite important just because it grounds your proposal into previous work that has been done in the field. And so every proposal should be well grounded in one of those four areas, which would be pedagogy, research, theory, or policy. And focus on the theoretical basis or practical background or policy framework for it. Also, you need to consider what ways is your session connected to the existing current practices, issues, or literature. If you're not connecting it to anything, you will get marked down in your proposal. So make sure that you're really specifying how it's connected to previous work that's been done in the field. Also, terminology, ideas, statistics, debates, or citations need to show your knowledge of the topic. So if you're doing a pedagogy focused session, and you don't have as much research related to it, that's okay, but the terminology that you're using should be what's used in our field. For example, if you're talking about pronunciation, that you would use terminology like segmentals or super segmentals to talk about teaching pronunciation. Also, make sure that you're using in-text citations. The full reference list is not required, but I will say that in the optional reference or citation section, I would put that in there. So any kind of citations that you put in the session, put it in the works cited section. Did you indicate the point of departure for your session? In other words, what is the gap or motivation for this session, or what's the need in the literature or research or practice or policy? Get to that point, and I'll talk more about this as we look at rhetorical moves later, but you need to think of how are you going to establish the problem and why is your session important and needed. There's a lot of different ways to do that, so I'm not going to read all of that, but I'll let you read that on your own. And also, have you shown that your session is unique or a new application that has not been addressed already in previous research or presentations? If you're putting out something that's already been done, it's likely that it may not be chosen for TESOL. They're looking for cutting edge sessions, things that are kind of moving the profession forward. And so consider how your session adds to that or builds off of what's already been done. Also, does your session synthesize citations, terminology to achieve one of the following, either indicating a gap, challenging a broadly held assumption, raising a question, or extending current knowledge and practice? For the third focus, you need to give a good description of your session content and the plan of what you plan to do during your session. And I'm going to go into this specifically based on what kind of type of session that you're going to do in the next few slides. But just generally, be sure to give specific details about your session. In other words, there should be a clear link between what you plan to say and how you plan to support it during the session to achieve your session goals and objectives. If your session is a practice or pedagogy-oriented session, you need to make sure that you present a clear description of teaching tasks, strategies, or techniques to be introduced in the section. Also, did you show how the tasks or techniques address the teaching gap, the need, or the goal that you addressed earlier? And did you outline the different sections of your session? In other words, how are they being sequenced? I've seen some proposals where people have done like 1, 2, 3, 4 and actually sequenced it that way, but more often than not, I see it sequenced just written out in sentences of what the plan would be and what it looks like. For research-oriented sessions, you need to make sure that you present a clear description of your research design. So that includes your research questions that need to be included, who are your participants, your data collection, and your analysis procedures. Now this is really hard because you're only limited to 300 words for your proposal. So you have to really focus on how you're going to talk about these things. And you don't have to get into too much detail specifically about your participants, like for example, their ages, but you may want to say that they are international teaching assistants at a university or something like that. Also, is there a close link between your research design and your research questions? Does it seem like this is a valid research study that's been done? And did you clearly indicate the overall findings of your research? Make sure you include that in your proposal and really point that out, because that is one big thing that I've noticed as a reviewer, is that sometimes people aren't very clear about what their findings were from what they did. So do make sure that you point that out. And also, did you outline the different sections of your session? In other words, how are they sequenced, which is similar to the previous session. For a conceptually oriented session, you need to answer these questions of did you present an argument that synthesizes existing practice, theory, or research? That's a big one. Did you present a novel interpretation of a theoretical perspective, claim, or idea? In other words, does your argument go beyond restating the other's ideas to presenting original interpretations or reinterpretations, insights, or applications? And did you outline the different sections of your session and how they're sequenced? For policy-oriented sessions, you need to make sure that you presented a clear description and assessment of the policy that is under scrutiny. Did you present a clear description of the method, evidence, and justification for action? Did you present a discussion with suggestions for a call to action or reform of the results of action that you're proposing, if any? And finally, did you outline the different sections of your session and how they're sequenced? For focus 4, the outcomes and implications for educational settings, you need to think about just the TESOL audience and who you're including into it. So that includes pre and in-service current teachers or teacher educators, teacher scholars, program administrators. Your proposal should state objectives and outcomes for your target audience. And in other words, did you discuss your future plan of action, your proposed solution, and the procedures for the next steps? And are these relevant, appropriate, and achievable? You also need to consider what practical applications or implications does it provide for the potential audience. And did you specify what you hope the audience will take away from your session? Followed by how would this session impact or benefit the TESOL field and professionals. Something again that I've noticed is that some issues in the past with especially ITA related sessions is that they might be too focused on the audience of ITA professionals. And so when considering submitting your proposal, yes, I think the first audience in mind would be ITA professionals, but you need to frame your proposal in such a way that a wider audience could take away some different things from it besides just an ITA related audience. And so that would be a big tip that I would like to point out and could potentially help you improve your proposals. For this focus, you need to make sure that your proposal is appropriate in terms of the length, the content, and the delivery methods. In other words, did you choose the right context, the right setting, the right focus, the right type, and the right strand? All of these things are really important because if you happen to submit it to the wrong strand, your proposal might not get accepted and it could be disqualified. So think about establishing a logical connection between your delivery methods and also your choices of length and content. So for example, if you're proposing a workshop, have you included a clear description of the participant activities? If you're doing a panel, have you shown how each presenter will contribute to the discussion of your larger topic? If you're proposing a 45-minute presentation, have you worked out a schedule that allows you to cover content and leave time for a Q&A? Also, did you consider the time constraints of your session and adjust your session objectives and participant outcomes accordingly? For this final focus, You're being assessed on just the overall clarity of your proposal to just make sure that the presentation is a quality presentation. And so can you answer yes to all of these questions? Is it a well-written proposal in terms of the style, content, and scope? Did you provide clear connections between the ideas presented? Did you proofread your proposal? Does the final version reflect the quality of your session? And did you double check the word count? In this final section, we're going to be focusing on how to write your proposal and look at specific examples. The first step to writing your proposal is to first make an outline. I suggest doing this because it will ensure that you have all of the important focus areas that are being that you're being assessed on. And so try to answer these general questions which are related to the rubric itself. So in other words, why is this important to the field? What is the session type? What is the purpose and participant outcomes? How does the theory or practice relate directly to the presentation content? What are the conclusions or recommendations and how it will be well substantiated? And for the final one, don't answer this, but ask this to yourself, is how clear is your proposal? That should give you a good start if you have an idea already for a proposal. The second step that I would suggest is to actually focus on writing the session description first. And so this will help you later be able to write your title as well as your abstract. And I just want to preview a little bit and tell you that the abstracts are probably the hardest one to write just because of the word count limit. So for this step, you are required to have 300 words or less for your session description, and the reviewers are the only ones who see this, but the majority of your proposal is being assessed on this section because this is where you're putting in a lot of the detail of what kind of session it is, how it's going to be done. So doing this first will also help you come up with a good title and help you take out some of the main ideas and fit them into your abstract later. So according to Halleck and Connor, who did a study on the different types of rhetorical moves that are used in TESOL proposals, they found a common rhetorical structure that usually focuses on these main things here. So the first thing is the territory, which establishes the situation in which the activity in the proposal is placed or physically located. The second one is reporting previous research or practice, and this refers to text that reports on or refers to earlier research in the field, either by the proposing researcher or by others. It can also refer to debates and/or terms used in the research. The next one is the gap, and this indicates that there is a lack of knowledge or a problem in the territory. This move serves to explain the motivation of the study. The goal is what it is that you plan to do and just the procedure in itself of what the main outcome is for that. But the means of it is really what are, the research methods, the procedures, the plans of action, the tasks that the proposal specifies as leading up to that goal. And this can include the methods and procedures to carry out the actual presentation. The outcomes are explaining the intended or projected outcomes, which could be considered useful to, quote unquote, the real world outside of the study or presentation itself. And so again, think about how can a general audience get some things from that and glean from that information. And then finally, the benefits is explaining the intended or projected outcomes, which could be considered useful to the audience. This is a proposal that I actually sent in for TESOL a couple of years ago, and it was accepted. And so I know that this is quite small, actually, for you to read. And I just want you to go ahead and pause the video now and just take a minute to kind of read through it on your own at first. And then what I'm going to do in the next few slides is break it down paragraph by paragraph and apply the rhetorical structure to this specific one. Just something to note is that not always do you follow the same order of the typical rhetorical structure. Sometimes you use two moves in one, and we'll see that in a minute. But go ahead and take a minute now to read through this. In this section of the first paragraph, we see that the territory and the gap are what are being identified as first. And again, you'll see that this doesn't necessarily follow the exact order of the typical rhetorical structure, and that's okay. But I would suggest just maybe take a minute, pause this to read through it and apply it to what the rhetorical structure is. In this second paragraph, you'll notice that the entire paragraph is actually the goal of the presentation. In the third paragraph, we actually see two moves combined into one, where the previous research and practice is being referenced, as well as the goal of the presentation. And then finally, you see the means of how this will be achieved and how the talk will be organized. In the fourth paragraph, we see a continuation of the means, and as well as the outcomes of this presentation. And finally, we see the last paragraph, which is being devoted specifically for the benefits of what the attendees will gain. So I just wanted to color code all of these areas and just kind of show you what we have here. And so we start out with the territory and then the gap. The goal is there along with the research and goal continued. The means is kind of formed in two paragraphs there with the outcomes, and then the last paragraph are the benefits. TESOL has some sample proposals in a writing guide for specific kinds of sessions, and I would really just want to emphasize that this would be a really good place for you to look at other proposals and see how they're written. And I would suggest trying to analyze them using this typical rhetorical structure. It might be helpful for you to kind of do what I just did earlier and figure out within the sample proposal where these things are happening. After you have written your session description, the next step would be to choose a title if you haven't thought of one yet already. And titles need to be clear but also eye-catching because this will be what's listed in the program book. However, it is a little limited because you have a 10-word count limit, and acronyms are allowed, and so there is an acronym list on the previous slide that I just had on there will give you the acronym list for what you can use. This is helpful because if you are trying to say ITAs, that would be considered one word rather than saying International Teaching Assistants, which would be 3 words. So it is really helpful to try to use acronyms that are approved to your best ability just because it helps you with the word count. Something also to note is that hyphens do count as one word. So if you see what I have highlighted here as this example, it says mentor-mentee interactions and investigative study of the process of topics. The mentor-mentee part actually counts as one word. So hyphens can also be a really good way of cutting down on your word count limit. Another thing to just note is that you cannot use any exclamation marks or question marks. And in terms of capitalization, the first letter and most words are capitalized, which include the word after a hyphen, a slash, or a colon. And you can see that in that example that I have there. You should use lowercase for the first letter of articles, prepositions, and conjunctions of 3 or fewer letters. And also, again, just as a reminder, check the approved acronym and abbreviation list. These are the titles that were related to ITAs from TESOL 22 this past year. And I just wanted to show it to you just because it might give you a better idea of what things you might want to include, or just even see how these are written using ITAs. I do have on here a QR code if you're interested in looking at all of the other ITA related sessions that were done at TESOL 2022, just to give you an idea of what kinds of things people were writing proposals for and that were accepted. But you can also go into there and take a look at the session descriptions, which might be helpful later for you. So the last step is writing the abstract. And like I said, writing abstracts are actually the hardest because it needs to be descriptive enough since it will be in the program book. But you only have a 50 word count limit. And so it's really difficult to try to fit all of that in just a 50 word count limit. And so something that I've kind of just looked at, and I've kind of borrowed this from the other rhetorical structure, but this is just personally what I've noticed in how I've written abstracts, is that common moves that are used is usually, explaining what the topic is. Sometimes you might want to put the gap in there, explaining the session type, which could be, you could say this presentation or this poster or this panel, whatever it is, along with maybe the session goal, and give the overall overview of the content as well as outcomes. And then it is important to also put attendee benefits in there. So let's take a look at an example of this. So I'll let you go ahead and just take a brief minute here to read through this on your own. But once you do that, I'm going to just go ahead and put the common moves up here just for your reference, and we'll look at them in just a second here on the next slide. So the first sentence that's done in the abstract is following the first common move of the topic or gap. The next sentence combines some of the moves, which would be the overview of the content, the outcome, and also the attendee benefits. And you also see in the last line is the attendee benefits. Something that is missing here is the session type. You may have noticed that. And it could be shown that, you could say that this presentation will, in this presentation, attendees will learn how to, blah, 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 whatever it is. So it is easy to put in the session type, but it just happened to not be written in this example here. So let's take a look at one more. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and let you take a minute here to just briefly read this, and then I'll just show you the common moves again on here. So in the first sentence, we actually have 3 moves in one. So we have the topic and gap, the session type, as well as the overview of the content. The second sentence involves the outcomes. And finally, the last sentence shows the attendee benefits. So now that you have your proposal written, you've got your session description, your title, as well as your abstract, you can choose to make an optional works cited section. And I do want to just talk about this because one thing to note is that although this is an optional section, I would say that it is still an important part of the of your proposal, because it shows what kind of literature you're looking at and what you're reviewing. And so make sure that you have, if you list any sources within your session description and, you're using in-text citation for it using either APA or MLA, any kind of standard format is okay. Works cited is not being assessed on formatting at all, actually. It's not part of it, but it does inform the reviewer of what kind of background or literature you as the writer of the proposal is aware of, and how it might substantially be connected to previous literature out there. And so I would suggest current sources are going to help you a lot more than using older sources. One thing I would suggest is just keeping that in mind, is because sometimes older sources might be scrutinized depending on what the topic is. For example, if you are citing literature from the 1990s, but a lot of information has changed since then, your presentation may not come off as relevant or even cutting edge. So that's something to keep note of, is trying to find current research or current literature on something to build off of what's been done already. So the works cited section, again, is not part of the 300 word count limit for the session description. However, the in-text citations do count. So just keep in mind that, any in-text citations, those will count towards it, but nothing in the works cited page. One thing that I would suggest doing is to make sure that you check your work once you've got everything written and done. Make sure you review the TESOL rubric again. And does your proposal answer these questions again? Number 1, does your proposal specifically highlight the currency, importance, and appropriateness of your session? 2, does the rationale of your proposal make explicit reference to relevant pedagogy, research, theory, and/or policy? 3, does your proposal indicate a coherent description of the session content and plan? 4, did you clearly identify the objectives and outcomes for participants and for educational settings? And 5, does your proposal indicate appropriate length, content, and delivery methods for your session? Finally, I would suggest ask someone to proofread your proposal, especially someone who has been a proposal reviewer before would be great, but even just another set of eyes is helpful as you're preparing these. If you're interested in improving your proposal writing, one of the best ways is to actually become a strand proposal reviewer. Of course, this won't help you for this round in terms of writing a better proposal for this upcoming TESOL. However, looking at it and reviewing what other people are writing and how they're doing it will help you improve as you are writing future proposals. So something that I would say is choose a strand that you feel that you have the most expertise in. Since our interest section is quite multidisciplinary, it's nice that, we could be strand reviewers in a variety of different strands. And that's helpful because it gives us as, ITAIS members having such a voice and representation within TESOL. It gives us a lot more variety to be able to kind of be seen amongst all of our other TESOL colleagues. And I would say it's not too much of a time commitment. On average, you have about 10 proposals that are assigned to you. And remember, these proposals are quite short because, they're about 300 words long. But you could, sign up to review more if you wanted to, but usually you get about a 2 to 3 week period of time. And this year, the proposal review period will be from June 18th to June 30th. So I would say for myself, it's never taken me more than 5 hours to review. And that might also be a little bit more of a stretch. Maybe not even more than like 2 or 3 hours, depending on what the situation is. And sometimes I do need to look up something if I'm concerned about types of literature that someone has, but to be honest, it's really not that hard. It has helped me just see how proposals are written and notice that it really is a certain genre. So there will be some online asynchronous trainings during the beginning and middle of June. And so if you're interested in applying for it, please do so. There's the URL link down there, but there's also the QR code if you want to scan that. I know that you might still have some questions, and so I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I'm also planning to do either a Q&A or just a workshop sometime in May, and I'll be in touch with that on our listserv as we get closer to that. And finally, I just wanted to point out some of the references that I have here of the Halleck and Connor article, as well as some of the web links that I have mentioned in here. And I tried to make them into tiny URLs so it's a little bit easier for you to find them. But thanks for sticking through all of this. I hope you didn't listen to all of it. I think right now I'm at like 46 minutes. So if you did, thank you so much. But I'm also, again, happy to hear from you if you have any further questions. Thanks.